So I was just getting set up to do some painting, and then I remembered that a friend asked me to make another video on candle information because I make candles as well. So this is obviously a brand new candle, and because I use a quite soft wax, I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but the top's gone a little bit funky, but that's just because they got hot. So all I need to do is just brush the hot air gun over and it'll smooth out the tops. But if you look at how long the wick is, that's how long your wick you always want it. So every time you burn the candle, I mean, you've got wick trimmers like this. You can get them at different shops or Amazon or eBay, wherever you shop. And when you burn them, the wick will get longer. And so every time you burn, you want to trim the wick once it's cold. And that's, I mean, you can do it with nail clippers or that tool. Some scissors are really annoying. They'll more bend it than a clean cut. That's why I prefer nail clippers or a candle top cutting tool. And when you blow the candle out, you can see the difference there. That's when I make them, they're dead centered. But then when you burn them, it heats up the whole wax. And obviously, using a really soft wax, it's one of the downfalls is it'll heat up the entire wax, even though it's only the top melt. Like, you'll have the melt pool, which you can see the melt pool has gone to there, but the wick will start to fall over a little bit. So I've purposely left some of these just to show the difference. So next time I burn this, probably half an hour into the burn, I'll just get a toothpick or something and just push that over so it's centered, and that'll help, because you can see how that side's all even and then that side's not. So the more centered you'll keep it, the more you'll get an even, consistent burn, so that you'll eventually end up with a completely, like, very little wax on the side. But you want to, that's had 2 burns on it. So for the first 2 or 3 burns, I don't like to burn it all the way to the edge. Usually you'll get a couple of hours with mine and then blow it out. You kind of want to get it to around that sort of diameter. Like the first layer, I haven't burnt one fresh, so I don't have one to show, but basically you kind of want that amount of gap the entire way around the candle the first burn, then blow it out. And then the second burn, you just want a little bit more, and each time you kind of want to get closer and closer to the edge. So I mean, even that, this one I've done a little bit different as well. So with a tin like this, so I mean, that's probably down to about there. So I would blow it out with about half a centimetre left and then discard it, basically, because you don't want to go all the way to the bottom, because especially with tins, the tin will get really hot, glass will get really hot as well. So always put it on a coaster or something fireproof or heatproof, because they do get extremely hot, because obviously it's fire. And so I mean, this one I just started to show. So if I was to initially burn this candle from brand new, if I only blew it out, then it starts to create a memory in the actual wax. So if you keep only burning it for a short period of time, like half an hour here, half an hour there, it'll start to tunnel, and then it'll create a memory in the candle where you won't be able to get a full burn, where you won't burn all of the wax, because it just doesn't have, you haven't got it close enough to the edge. You can get away with it a little bit, but if you do it too much, you will end up with chunks on the side like this. So that's one that is a really good example of blowing candles out too quickly. I mean, I can easily burn that too long now, and then that'll just melt all the wax off the sides, and then it'll be fine. But when you burn them incorrectly, it's actually what leads to candles that go out all the time. So because if you're trimming the wick, especially as it goes down, the outside will start to melt, and then it'll pull up more of the wax, and you'll end up overflowing and flooding the wick. So basically the way the wick works is it's that Century effect, where it pulls up the wax and the fragrance oil through the wick, and then goes out through the flame. So it's always like the air is always tumbling around it. So it's always heating up towards the edge. So there are a few tips. And then this one is one that I've been doing a wick testing on. You can see the black soot on the edge. That's a sign that you've either the wick is too long. So if I didn't trim that and burnt it, that would happen, even though they're perfectly designed, because I do a lot of testing when I make them, to match the right wick with the right wax in the right size container. It's a hell of a lot of candle testing to get the right combination to properly burn a candle entirely. But even with that, if I wasn't trimming the wick properly, you'll still end up with that soot because it's creating too much heat, and it'll just start smoking because it doesn't have enough fuel to sort of snuff the fire, if that makes sense. It basically creates too big of a flame. So if you're seeing that and you're trimming the wicks really short, this is a wood wick, so wood wicks you have to trim extremely short compared to, like, if you have a wood wick hanging out that far, it's just going to be soot city. So that's what I do. And then this is another example. This isn't one that I've been burning, but I just found it, and you can see that they've actually put the lid on way too quick. So the candle hasn't properly cooled, and it's just created a whole bunch of like rippling on the surface. So, and that's why because the lid was on and they've got hot because of the hot weather, it creates that little bit of ripple in the surface. So it's the same if you put the candle on, and if you like to keep a smooth surface, let the candle completely cool and then put the lid on, because they will sweat a little bit otherwise. And yeah, that's probably the best advice I can give there. And then when I finish, I throw them in the freezer. These have been in the freezer for ages. And then the wax will just come out. And I use a sticker on the bottom, so if you've got any of mine, there'll be this little white sticker in the middle under the wick holder. And that's just, I like using them because it keeps them centered. Some will be cleaner than others. And then I usually use a paper towel, wipe it out a bit, and then I'll use a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, and then you can reuse the tin. So yeah, hopefully that helps someone. And the biggest thing is just because they do get hot, and especially poorly designed candles, if people haven't properly wick tested them and they're not using the right combination of wick, wax in the right size vessel, I can go to the shops and I can just look at a candle and I can see whether it's going to burn correctly or not by the combination they've used. And a lot of the times people don't do enough testing and they put too big of a wick in, and it actually creates so much heat that, especially glass has a tendency to explode when it overheats. There's pros and cons with tin and glass. I'm personally switching from tin to glass. I'm only going to use glass now. But yeah, your poorly designed candles you have to really watch, especially the really cheap ones at the shopping centres, because it's just mass produced and often not tested properly. So yeah, that's my advice, which, what I've just shared, you can use those techniques on any candle, and by following that, you'll see how well the candle is made, because you should be able to burn it all the way. If I've burnt mine all the way to the bottom till they've gone out, and not an issue, but it's not something I would recommend. I only do it for testing reasons. But yeah, wasting that last bit of wax at the bottom, it stops the tin from getting extremely hot. Which, yeah, it's, if you're going to do it, make sure you're around the candle towards the end, because towards the end is when it gets the hottest, because obviously there's a lot more density in the whole candle versus very little wax down the bottom. So, and especially if you're using cheap glass, like I use, these are really nice quality glass. Very, very picky with the glass that I use, because if you're just getting the really poorly cheap made glass, they're not they're not designed to take heat. That's another issue a lot of people I've seen with exploding candles. They're not using glass containers that are designed for candle use. So yeah, and if anyone's making candles as well, these tips will help too. So if anyone's making candles, just the more wax and wick combinations you can test, the better. And don't just do one. Usually I would do multiple candles exactly the same, just so that you can sort of get that average, because even while you're testing them side by side, there will be a little bit of inconsistency, and even spacing is really important. When I wick test, I make sure that I've got them spaced out so that the heat of each one isn't interfering with one another, because they do throw off a fair bit of heat. I mean, you only need to put a candle, say you lit one of those candles and then left them next to each other, you'd actually notice by the time you go to blow it out, the other candle will have gone quite soft. So, yeah, just a tip for any candle makers that happen to watch this. It's especially using really soft soy wax, which is my favourite, because it's just what I settled on, was a really soft soy, because it gives good hot throw, cold throw scent, and I can fill an extremely large room with one of these little tins. So, all right, I hope everyone has an awesome day, and hopefully that was informative and prevents someone from having an accident with a candle, because I've heard of too many of them. And yeah, the more awareness that's brought to it, the more. And obviously as well, like that's something else I forgot to mention, is pay attention to what's above the candle, because I've seen photos of people burning candles under curtains and really highly flammable things. If, like, play around, put your hand on top of the candle and see how high up you can feel the heat, and it's very surprising how high up you can actually feel that heat going. Or another thing is, if you can put something that will move up high near it, you'll actually, especially if you put it close to a wall, you'll actually see it move at the ceiling. So like if you were to put the candle up against, so say that's your wall, and then you put your candle on a mantelpiece or something, if you were to put a feather up on the wall at the ceiling, you would actually see the feather moving. They throw the heat up that high. So yeah, I've seen some pretty bad house fires from candles. So yeah, I would highly recommend people taking it seriously, because they're really awesome. But if they're awesome if they're used correctly, without knowing how to properly burn a candle, it can be detrimental. Unfortunately, people that make candles have seen far too many incidences, because you go searching for what goes wrong. So yeah, have an awesome day, and I will see everyone soon. About to go do some painting.